crystal chandelier above our dining table had never felt so heavy, casting fractured light across the mahogany surface where my father's judgment would soon shatter my world. I smoothed my black dress with trembling fingers, the same one I'd worn to Mother's funeral 3 years ago. Tonight felt like another death was coming. "Bella, stop fidgeting," my father Victor commanded, without looking up from his wineglass. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccable as always. Every inch the successful businessman who'd built Moreno Enterprises from nothing. "Daniel will be here any moment, and I expect you to conduct yourself with dignity." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dignity. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. What my father called dignity, I called performance. The endless parade of suitable bachelors he'd arranged for me over the past year. All wealthy, all connected, all utterly soulless. None of them made me laugh the way Daniel did when he told stories about his day at the auto shop, grease still under his fingernails, eyes bright with dreams bigger than his circumstances. The doorbell echoed through our mansion like a death knell. My heart hammered against my ribs as our housekeeper Elena led Daniel into the dining room. He looked handsome in his borrowed suit, the one his brother Mateo had insisted he wear tonight. His dark hair was slicked back, and he carried a small bouquet of daisies, my mother's favorite flowers. The gesture nearly broke my heart. "Mr. Moreno, thank you for having me," Daniel said, extending his hand with quiet confidence. His accent carried the slight lilt of the barrio where he'd grown up, where I'd first met him volunteering at the community center Mom had supported before she died. My father's handshake was perfunctory, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Daniel, isn't it? Bella tells me you work with your hands. I'm a mechanic at my family's shop, but I'm also studying business at night school. I graduate next semester." "How admirable," Father said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Please sit. Let's eat before it gets cold." Dinner unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Father's questions grew increasingly pointed, each one designed to highlight Daniel's humble origins. "Where did you grow up? What does your father do for a living? How much money do you make?" Daniel answered each with grace, never defensive, never ashamed. I wanted to reach across the table and squeeze his hand, but I knew it would only make things worse. "Tell me, Daniel," Father said as dessert was served, "what exactly are your intentions with my daughter?" This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Daniel straightened his shoulders, and I saw the steel beneath his gentle exterior. "I love her, sir. I want to marry her and build a life together." The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Father set down his fork with deliberate precision, his dark eyes, so much like mine, turning cold as winter stone. "Marry her?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My boy, do you have any idea what you're asking? Bella is a Moreno. She was raised for a certain kind of life, with certain expectations. She deserves someone who can provide for her properly, someone of substance. I may not have money now, but I have ambition. I have plans. I'll take care of her, Mr. Moreno. I promise you that." "Plans," Father's voice dripped with contempt. "Pretty words from a mechanic's son? What can you possibly offer my daughter that she doesn't already have? What future can you give her beyond a life of financial struggle?" Heat rose in my chest like a flash fire. "Papa, stop." "Stay out of this, Isabella." His use of my full name was a warning, but I was past caring about warnings. "No, I won't stay out of this. Daniel is a good man. He's kind and hardworking, and he loves me. Mama would have liked him." Father's face went white. "Don't you dare bring your mother into this. Your mother married me because I could give her the life she deserved. I built all of this for you, for our family name, and you want to throw it away for what? Love?" He spat the word like poison. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "For love, because that's what matters, not money or status or what other people think. Mama taught me that before she died. Your mother was a romantic fool, and apparently so are you."
Father turned his cold stare at Daniel. "You need to leave, now, and you need to stay away from my daughter." Daniel stood slowly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "With respect, sir, that's Bella's choice to make." "Is it?" Father smiled like a shark. "Bella, if you walk out of this house with him, don't bother coming back. I'll cut you completely. No money, no family, no future. Choose carefully."
The room spun around me. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. I'd imagined resistance, maybe arguments, but not this nuclear ultimatum, not complete banishment from the only family I had left. But as I looked at Daniel standing there, refusing to grovel or beg, maintaining his quiet strength in the face of my father's cruelty, I heard my mother's voice in my memory. "Mija, when you find someone who loves you for who you are, not what you have, hold on tight. That kind of love is rarer than diamonds." I walked around the table and took Daniel's hand. His fingers were warm and steady, grounding me as my world crumbled and rebuilt itself simultaneously. "I choose love, Papa. I choose him." Father's face cracked, something broken flashing in his eyes before the coldness returned. "Then you're no daughter of line. Get out, both of you, and don't come crawling back when reality hits." Daniel squeezed my hand. Together, we walked toward the door, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of the house where I'd grown up, where I'd laughed with my mother, where I'd just chosen my future over my past. As we stepped into the cool evening air, I didn't look back. I couldn't, because I knew if I did, I might see the father I'd once adored standing in the doorway, and I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to keep walking. The apartment Daniel shared with his brother Mateo was smaller than my former walk-in closet, but it welcomed me with warmth that my father's mansion never had. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually opened, carrying the sounds of children playing in the courtyard below and the distant hum of the auto shop where Daniel worked. "It's not much," Daniel said nervously, setting my single suitcase, all I'd managed to pack before Father changed the locks, on the modest bed. "But it's clean, and Mateo said he'd take the couch so you could have privacy." I ran my fingers along the hand-carved crucifix above the bed, a gift from their late grandmother. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and family photos covered every available surface, faces filled with genuine joy, not the forced smiles from our formal family portraits. "It's perfect," I whispered, and meant it. The first weeks were a shock to my system. I'd never made my own bed, never worried about grocery budgets, or wondered if we had enough quarters for the laundromat. My hands, soft from a lifetime of luxury, developed blisters from washing dishes and scrubbing floors. But slowly, I began to find a rhythm in these simple tasks, satisfaction in creating order and comfort with my own two hands. Mateo proved to me my unexpected ally in this transition. 5 years younger than Daniel, he had their mother's quick smile and their father's stubborn optimism. When he found me crying over a burnt pot of rice during my second week, he didn't judge or mock. "My first time cooking alone, I set the smoke alarm off 3 times, he said, gently taking the ruined pot from my hands. "Mama always said the kitchen teaches patience, but she never mentioned it also teaches humility. Come on, I'll show you the trick with the water ratio." As he guided me through making a fresh batch, I realized this was what family really meant. Not the cold perfection of formal dinners, but the messy, imperfect process of learning together, of being allowed to fail without judgment. Daniel left for work before dawn each morning, returning home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his shoulders. But his eyes would light up when he saw me, and he'd tell me about his day, the difficult repairs, the demanding customers, the small victories that came with fixing something broken and making it run again. "I enrolled in 2 more business classes this semester," he told me one evening as we walked hand in hand through the neighborhood. The smell of Mrs. Hernandez's tamales drifted from her kitchen window, mixing with the jasmine blooming along the fence. "That's wonderful," I said, squeezing his hand. "What sparked your interest in that?" "Watching how inefficiently some of the auto parts suppliers operate," he replied, with his voice taking on the passionate edge I'd come to love. "They waste so much time and money with poor organization. I keep thinking there has to be a better way, a smarter system."
This was the Daniel my father had been too blinded by prejudice to see, not just a mechanic with dirty hands, but a visionary with an analytical mind and the drive to turn ideas into reality. 3 months after I'd left my father's house, a letter arrived with the elegant Moreno Enterprises letterhead. My heart jumped, hoping against hope that father had reconsidered, that maybe he wanted to reconcile. Instead, I found a coldly formal document from his attorney, officially removing me from his will and dissolving my trust fund. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, finding me on the apartment building's roof where I'd gone to read the letter in private. "He really meant it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "When he said I was no daughter of his, this makes it legal." Daniel sat beside me, his presence steady and warm in the cooling evening air. "I'm sorry, mi amor. I know how much you hoped he might change his mind."
"The strange thing is," I said, surprised to realize I meant it, "I'm not as devastated as I thought I'd be. These past months with you, with your family, I've learned what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not what I represent. That letter can't take that away." A few days later, Rosa, my father's younger sister, appeared at our door. I hadn't seen her since the night I'd chosen Daniel, and her presence in our humble apartment felt surreal. "Bella, mija," she said, her eyes filling with tears as she pulled me into a fierce embrace. "Your father forbade me from contacting you, but I couldn't stay away any longer." Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Over coffee, Rosa filled me in on the family gossip and business news, carefully avoiding mention of father's reaction to my departure. But as she prepared to leave, she handed me an envelope with my name written in her careful script. "This came to the house addressed to you," she said quietly. "Your father told me to throw it away, but I couldn't. It's from that foundation your mother supported." After Rosa left, I opened the letter with trembling fingers. The Community Education Foundation was offering me a part-time position as a literacy tutor, working with adults who are learning to read. The pay was modest, but the work would be meaningful. "They want me to start next Monday," I told Daniel, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "You should do it," he said immediately. "You'd be incredible at that." For the first time since leaving my father's house, I felt a sense of purpose beyond survival. I would have my own work, my own small contribution to the world. Not because I was Victor Moreno's daughter, but because of my own skills and compassion. That night, as I lay in Daniel's arms in our small bed, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into sleep, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my father's mansion: complete peace. We had so little in terms of material wealth, but we had each other, and we had hope. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness. "I love you too. And I promise you, Bella, someday I'll be able to give you everything you deserve." "You already have," I said, and in that moment I understood what my mother had meant about love being rarer than diamonds. In this tiny apartment with a man the world would consider beneath my station, I had found riches my father's money could never buy. 2 years into our new life, the romance of poverty had worn thin, replaced by the grinding reality of making ends meet on love and determination alone. Daniel worked double shifts at the auto shop while attending business school, coming home exhausted but still finding energy to help me grade papers from my tutoring job. Our dreams felt simultaneously closer and more impossible than ever. "The rent's going up again," I told Daniel as I opened the letter from our landlord. $200 more a month starting in January. Daniel looked up from his textbooks, rubbing his eyes. Dark circles had become permanent fixtures on his face, and I worried about how much he was pushing himself. "You're already working 7 days a week," I protested. "When would you sleep?" "Sleep is overrated," he said with a tired smile, but I could see the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. He'd taken on the burden of providing for both of us, refusing to let me feel like a financial drain on his family.
The tutoring center where I worked had offered me additional hours, but the pay barely covered groceries. I'd swallowed my pride and applied for other positions, retail jobs, restaurant work, anything that might help us save money for Daniel's business dreams. But my lack of practical work experience, combined with an address in the barrio, meant most applications disappeared into the void. "There's something I need to tell you," Daniel said one evening as we shared a dinner of beans and rice, our third consecutive night eating the same meal. "Professor Martinez approached me about an internship opportunity." My heart jumped with hope. "That's wonderful! Where?" "Cruise Logistics. They're one of the biggest supply chain companies in the region." He paused, not meeting my eyes. "It's unpaid for the first 6 months, but if I prove myself, they might offer me a full-time position." The unspoken reality hung between us like a weight. We were already barely surviving on his current income. An unpaid internship, no matter how promising, would mean even deeper financial strain. "How unpaid is unpaid?" I asked carefully. "I'd have to quit the auto shop. We'd be living entirely on your tutoring income for 6 months, maybe longer." He finally looked at me, and I saw fear mixed with desperate hope in his dark eyes. "I know it sounds crazy, but Bella, this could be our chance. Professor Martinez thinks I could learn more in 6 months at Cruise than in 2 years anywhere else."
I thought about our empty refrigerator, the hole in my only pair of work shoes, the dreams I'd had to defer again and again. Then I thought about the man who'd chosen to love me when it cost him everything, who studied by candlelight when the power was shut off, who never complained about the sacrifices he was making for our future. "When do you start?" I asked. The look of relief and love on his face made every worry worth it. Meanwhile, across town and his glass office tower, my father was dealing with challenges of his own. Rosa visited us monthly now, a bridge between two worlds that had grown impossibly far apart. Through her carefully neutral updates, I learned that Moreno Enterprises was facing increased competition from newer, more agile companies. "Your father refuses to modernize," Rosa told me during one of her visits, stirring sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary. "Elena Ruiz's company is stealing clients with their innovative approach, but Victor insists that traditional methods are superior. He fires anyone who suggests otherwise." Elena Ruiz. I remembered the name from my father's bitter complaints during family dinners. A self-made businesswoman who'd built her logistics empire from a single delivery truck. She represented everything my father claimed to respect about entrepreneurship, except she'd been born poor and female, 2 strikes against her in his narrow worldview. "How bad is it?" I asked, surprised to find I still cared about the company that had been the third member of our family during my childhood. Rosa's expression grew troubled. "Bad enough that some of the board members are asking difficult questions. But you know your father. The more pressure he feels, the more rigid he becomes." Part of me felt vindicated. Father's stubborn pride, the same trait that had cost him his daughter, was now threatening his business empire. But mostly I felt sad for the man who'd once told me bedtime stories about building castles out of dreams and determination before grief and ego had hardened his heart. Daniel's internship proved to be everything Professor Martinez had promised. He threw himself into the work with passionate intensity, staying late to learn new systems, volunteering for the most challenging projects, making himself indispensable despite his temporary status. "They're letting me shadow the senior managers," he told me excitedly one evening, his exhaustion temporarily forgotten. "Today I sat in on a client presentation for a major contract. Bella, the inefficiencies in their current system are costing them thousands of dollars a month. I have ideas for improvements that could save them significant money." "Have you shared your ideas with them?" I asked, proud of his enthusiasm but worried about overreach. "I'm documenting everything first, building a comprehensive proposal. If I'm going to suggest changes, I want to make sure I have solid data to back up my recommendations." This was the Daniel I'd fallen in love with. Not just the sweet, gentle man who'd courted me with daisies, but the sharp-minded strategist who could see solutions where others saw only problems. His humble origins had taught him to observe carefully before speaking, to build trust through competence rather than demand it through position.
As the weeks passed, Daniel's confidence grew. He began mentioning names I recognized from the business section of the newspaper, companies that had once seemed as distant and powerful as mythical kingdoms. But now they were becoming real to him, potential partners in the empire he was quietly planning to build. Elena Ruiz's company bid on the same contract we're pursuing, he mentioned one evening. Their proposal was innovative, but I think we can do better. Mr. Cruz is letting me contribute to our counterproposal. The name sent a chill through me. Elena Ruiz, my father's rival, the woman whose success highlighted his growing failures. The irony wasn't lost on me that Daniel was now competing with the very person who'd been chipping away at my father's empire. On nights when worry about money kept me awake, I'd remember my mother's words about love being worth any sacrifice. But I'd also remember her practical wisdom. Mija, love pays the rent, but it pays it in ways you might not expect. When you invest in someone's dreams, you invest in your own future. Daniel was my investment in tomorrow. Every missed meal, every patched shoe, every night we fell asleep planning instead of dreaming, it was all building towards something larger than either of us could achieve alone. One evening, as I helped him prepare for a major presentation, I realized something had shifted. The scared boy who'd sat at my father's dining table, enduring insults with quiet dignity, was gone. In his place was a man who spoke with authority about million-dollar logistics contracts, who commanded respect through competence, who carried himself with the confidence that came from proving his worth in the most demanding arena imaginable. You know what the best part is? Daniel said as he practiced his presentation one more time. 6 months ago, people like Elena Ruiz would never have taken a meeting with someone like me. Now I'm competing directly with her for the same clients, and I think I might actually win. As I watched him, I felt a strange mixture of pride and anticipation, as if I were watching a preview of our future. Daniel was no longer the underdog my father had dismissed. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with.
And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that my father's world, built on old assumptions about who deserved success, was about to encounter a challenge he never saw coming. The champagne was cheap, bought from the corner store with the last $20 in our checking account, but it tasted like victory as Daniel and I sat on our apartment building's roof celebrating his first major contract. Cruz Logistics had not only hired him full-time, but had also agreed to back his independent consulting proposal for 3 smaller companies. "I can't believe it," Daniel said, shaking his head as he stared at the signed contracts spread across our makeshift table, a cardboard box covered with one of his mother's embroidered tablecloths. 6 months ago, I was changing oil filters. Now I'm restructuring supply chains for companies with million-dollar budgets. "I can believe it," I said, raising my plastic cup in a toast. "I've watched you work, seen how your mind operates. You don't just fix problems, Daniel. You reimagine entire systems. That's rare." The transformation in him was remarkable. Gone was the nervous energy of someone trying to prove himself. In its place was the quiet confidence of a man who'd discovered his true calling. When he talked about logistics now, his whole face lit up with the passion of someone who'd found the perfect intersection of talent and opportunity. "The Rodriguez account alone will bring in enough to cover our expenses for 3 months, he continued, still marveling at the numbers. "And if I can deliver the results I promised, word will spread. This could be the beginning of something bigger than I ever imagined." I thought about calling Rosa to share the news, then hesitated. These updates about our life inevitably made their way back to my father, and I wondered what he made of Daniel's growing success. Did he dismiss it as small-time ventures, or was there some part of him that recognized the irony of his former worthless son-in-law outpacing many established business owners? "Rosa mentioned something interesting at lunch last week," I said carefully. We'd established an unspoken rule about avoiding heavy discussions of my father, but this felt relevant. Apparently, father lost the Henderson account to Elena Ruiz's company. Henderson Industries was one of Moreno Enterprises' oldest clients. Daniel paused mid-sip, his expression growing thoughtful. Henderson Industries, they were considering Cruz Logistics too, but we couldn't match their volume requirements. Elena Ruiz must have made them an impressive offer. Rosa said father was furious, blamed it on Henderson being seduced by flashy new methods instead of recognizing the value of traditional service, the same way he blamed my rebellious phase instead of examining his own behavior.
Your father's biggest weakness is his inability to admit when he's wrong, Daniel said gently. In business, that kind of inflexibility is often fatal. Companies that refuse to evolve get left behind. 3 weeks later, Daniel received a call that would change everything. Alana Ruiz herself wanted a meeting. I'd seen her photo in business magazines, a striking woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd built Ruiz Logistics from nothing, much like my father had done with Moreno Enterprises. But where father had become rigid with success, Elena had remained adaptable, innovative, hungry. She wants to discuss a potential partnership, Daniel told me, his voice carefully controlled but unable to hide his excitement. His assistant said Elena has been following my work with Cruz and is impressed by my results. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Elena's downtown office. Daniel spent the weekend preparing, researching her company's recent moves, analyzing potential synergies between their operations and his growing client base. I helped him practice his presentation, playing devil's advocate to sharpen his arguments. Remember, I told him as he adjusted his tie, a new one we'd splurged on for the occasion. You're not the struggling mechanic asking for favors anymore. You're a successful consultant with proven results. She called you because she needs what you offer. The Alana Ruiz who greeted Daniel in her glass-walled conference room was exactly as formidable as her reputation suggested. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, diving straight into business with the directness of someone who'd learned to command respect in a male-dominated industry. I've been watching your work, Mr. Reyes. She spread several reports across the table. The Rodriguez restructuring increased their efficiency by 37%. The Martinez warehouse optimization cut their overhead by 22%. Impressive numbers for someone with less than 2 years in the field. Thank you, Daniel replied evenly. I believe fresh perspective can often identify solutions that traditional approaches miss. Elena smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown. Spoken like someone who's had to fight for every opportunity. I respect that. It's created a hunger in you that's rare in this business. The partnership she proposed was ambitious. Elena would provide capital and established client relationships, while Daniel would develop innovative solutions for companies struggling with outdated systems. It was a chance to scale his operation far beyond what he could achieve alone.
There is one thing you should know, Elena said as the meeting concluded. Some of the clients I'd want you to work with are currently served by Moreno Enterprises. Victor Moreno and I have history. If that creates any conflict of interest for you, we should address it now. Daniel's expression didn't change, but I knew him well enough to recognize the steel that entered his voice. My personal relationships don't interfere with my professional judgment, Miss Ruiz. If a client needs better service than they're currently receiving, they deserve to have that option. That evening, Daniel and I walked through the neighborhood where we'd built our new life, past the community center where we'd first met, past the auto shop where he'd learned the value of honest work, past the small apartment that had taught us the difference between wealth and richness. Are you sure about this? I asked as we paused outside our building. Working with Elena means potentially taking business directly from my father's company. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face me with an expression of profound seriousness. Bella, 3 years ago, your father looked at me and saw nothing but a poor boy who didn't deserve his daughter. He never asked about my ambitions, my character, my dreams. He judged me based solely on my bank account and my zip code. His voice softened slightly. I didn't choose to compete with Victor Moreno, but I also won't limit my own potential out of respect for a man who showed me none. If his clients choose my services over his, it won't be because of personal revenge. It will be because I offer them something better. I understood then that we'd reached a turning point. Daniel was no longer the underdog grateful for any opportunity. He was becoming a legitimate force in the industry, someone whose success would inevitably intersect with my father's declining empire. The collision that was coming wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was simply the natural consequence of talent and determination meeting entrenched complacency. As we climbed the stairs to our apartment, I thought about my mother's old saying about how life has a way of balancing the scales. She'd meant it as comfort during difficult times, a reminder that injustice rarely lasted forever.
but I was beginning to understand that balance didn't always look like fairness. Sometimes it looked like the student surpassing the teacher, the dismissed proving the dismisser wrong, the underestimated rising to heights that made their former detractors look small in comparison. The champagne was gone, but the taste of victory lingered. Tomorrow, Daniel would call Alana to accept her partnership offer. And somewhere across town, in his executive office overlooking the city he'd once ruled unchallenged, my father would continue making the same mistakes that had cost him his daughter and would soon cost him much more. The first time Daniel walked into Elena Ruiz's headquarters as her partner, I felt the shift in him like a change in atmospheric pressure. He moved differently through those marble hallways, his shoulders straighter, his handshake firmer when Elena's executives greeted him. This wasn't the nervous young man who'd once endured my father's insults over dinner. This was someone who belonged in boardrooms, someone whose opinion mattered. "The Castellanos account is yours to manage," Alana said during their first official strategy meeting. "They're frustrated with their current provider's inflexibility and are looking for innovative solutions." Sound familiar? I knew Elena was testing him, throwing him into the deep end with a high-stakes client who happened to be one of Moreno Enterprises' most profitable relationships. The message was clear. Prove you can not only compete with Victor Moreno, but surpass him. Daniel spent 2 weeks analyzing Castellano's industry's supply chain, identifying inefficiencies that had been costing them hundreds of thousands annually. When he presented his findings to their board, the transformation in the room was visible. What had started as polite skepticism evolved into engaged enthusiasm as Daniel outlined solutions that were both innovative and practical. "Mr. Reyes," said Maria Castellanos, the company CEO, "these recommendations would revolutionize how we operate. Why hasn't anyone presented options like this before?" "Sometimes," Daniel replied diplomatically, "established relationships can become comfortable routines. Innovation requires the willingness to question everything, even successful systems." The contract he secured was worth more than he'd earned in his entire previous career combined. But beyond the money, it represented something more significant: validation that his approach wasn't just different from the traditional methods, it was better. "Your father called Maria Castellanos personally," Rosa told me during our monthly lunch, her voice carefully neutral. "What did she tell him?" "That business is business, and they have a responsibility to their shareholders to pursue the most efficient operations available." Rosa's expression grew troubled. "Victor didn't take it well. He accused her of being disloyal, of abandoning their friendship for the sake of saving money." The old patterns, I thought. When challenged, my father's first instinct was always to make it personal, to frame professional decisions as betrayals rather than examine his own shortcomings. "How's he handling the loss?" I asked, surprised to find I still cared about the answer.
Badly. He's convinced there's some conspiracy against him, that Elena Ruiz is deliberately targeting his clients out of personal vendetta rather than simply outcompeting him. Rosa hesitated before adding, "He asked about you last week." My heart stuttered. "What did he ask?" "Whether you were involved somehow. Whether you were feeding information to Daniel about Moreno Enterprises clients." Rosa reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I told him that was ridiculous, that you'd never stoop to industrial espionage. But Bella, he's looking for someone to blame, and you're an easy target." That evening, I told Daniel about the conversation. He listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly serious. "I've been careful to avoid any appearance of impropriety," he said finally. "Everything I know about potential clients comes from public information or direct contact with them. I would never ask you to compromise your ethics, even to help my business." "I know that," I said quickly. "But my father, when he's cornered, he doesn't think rationally. If he starts spreading rumors about corporate espionage or conflicts of interest, it could damage your reputation." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out our window at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice carried a new hardness I'd never heard before. "Let him try. My results speak for themselves. Every client I've won has chosen my services based on demonstrated value, not inside information.
If Victor Moreno wants to destroy his own credibility by making baseless accusations, that's his choice. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 months after the Castellanos' victory, Daniel was attending an industry networking event when he found himself face to face with my father for the first time since that disastrous dinner. "You have some nerve," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly across the cocktail reception. "Using my daughter to steal my clients." The room grew quiet, conversations stopping as people sensed the tension. Daniel stood perfectly still, his expression calm but alert. "Mr. Moreno," he said evenly, "I've never used anyone to steal anything. My clients choose my services because I deliver results." "Results built on information you never should have had access to," Victor shot back. "Don't think I don't know what's really happening here. This whole thing is revenge, isn't it? You couldn't handle being rejected by your betters, so you're trying to tear down what took me 30 years to build." Elena Ruiz, who had been watching from across the room, glided over with the predatory grace of someone who'd built her empire by recognizing weakness and exploiting it. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, "perhaps we should take this conversation somewhere more private?" "There's nothing private about it," Victor replied, his composure cracking. "Everyone here should know they're dealing with corporate thieves who hide behind stolen intelligence." "Actually," Elena said, her voice turning ice cold, "everyone here should know that making defamatory statements without evidence is both unprofessional and potentially actionable. Mr. Reyes has won clients through superior service, something you might understand if you'd bothered to innovate in the past decade." The words hit their target. Victor's face flushed red, and for a moment, I thought he might actually throw a punch. Instead, he straightened his tie and tried to recover his dignity. "We'll see how long this partnership lasts. Elena, you of all people should know better than to trust opportunists." After he walked away, Elena turned to Daniel with something approaching respect in her eyes. "Well handled," she said. "You didn't take the bait, didn't let him provoke you into saying something you'd regret. That's the mark of someone who thinks strategically rather than emotionally." But Daniel's expression remained troubled. "He's going to escalate this, isn't he?" "Almost certainly," Elena agreed. "Desperate men do desperate things. But Daniel, you need to understand something. Victor Moreno's desperation isn't about you personally. His company has been hemorrhaging clients for 2 years. I've taken some, yes, but so have other competitors. He's facing the reality that his traditional approach is obsolete, and rather than adapt, he's looking for scapegoats." She paused, studying Daniel carefully. "The question is, are you prepared for what comes next? Because this isn't going to end with public confrontations at networking events. He's going to try to destroy your reputation, your relationships, your business. Can you handle that kind of pressure?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "I've already lost everything I was afraid to lose when I chose to marry Bella. My reputation is built on my work, and my work speaks for itself. Let him try to tear down what I've built. He'll only expose his own weakness in the process." Watching him stand there, confident and unshakable in the face of my father's threats, I finally understood what my mother had seen in him all those years ago when she encouraged me.
Follow my heart. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about character revealed under pressure, about the difference between those who build and those who simply tear down. The war between Daniel and my father was no longer coming. It had begun. And for the first time since that terrible dinner 3 years ago, I found myself completely certain about which side deserved to win. The first sign that my father's empire was truly crumbling came through Rosa's increasingly worried phone calls. What had started as casual updates about family news evolved into urgent consultations about Victor's erratic behavior and deteriorating business decisions. "He fired 3 department heads this month," she told me during a hasty coffee meeting. "Good people, loyal employees who'd been with the company for years. Their only crime was suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Moreno Enterprises needed to modernize its approach." I stirred my latte absently, processing the implications. The father I remembered had been demanding but fair, someone who valued competence over ego. This new version, who punished honesty and surrounded himself with yes men,
was someone I barely recognized. What triggered it? I asked. Henderson Industries wasn't the only major client we've lost. Martinez Shipping, Thompson Manufacturing, even the Valdez Group. They've all moved to other providers in the past 6 months. Rose's voice dropped to a whisper. The board is asking questions Victor doesn't want to answer. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father, who'd built his success by taking calculated risks and adapting to market changes, was now destroying his legacy by refusing to do either. Pride, the same trait that had cost him his daughter, was systematically dismantling everything he'd worked to create. Has he mentioned Daniel specifically? I asked carefully. Rose's expression grew pained. He's obsessed, Bella. He's convinced that Daniel is orchestrating some elaborate campaign against him, that every client who leaves is part of a conspiracy. He's even hired a private investigator to look into Daniel's business practices. My blood ran cold. He what? I tried to talk him out of it, but he's past listening to reason. He's convinced that if he can prove Daniel is using unethical methods, he can win back his reputation and his clients. Rosa leaned forward urgently. Bella, you need to warn Daniel. Your father is determined to find dirt, even if he has to manufacture it. That evening, I told Daniel about the private investigator. His reaction was calmer than I had expected, though I could see the steel behind his composed exterior. Let him investigate, Daniel said simply. Every contract I've won has been through legitimate competition. Every client relationship I've built is based on delivered results. If Victor wants to waste money on a fishing expedition, that's his choice. But what if he tries to plant evidence? What if he bribes someone to make false accusations? The scenarios spiraled in my mind, each more terrifying than the last. Daniel took my hands, grounding me with his steady presence. Bella, I understand why you're worried, but I won't change how I operate because of your father's paranoia. The moment I start looking over my shoulder, questioning every decision, is the moment I lose the confidence that's made me successful. He was right, of course. The Daniel who'd won client after client through innovative thinking and flawless execution couldn't coexist with someone paralyzed by fear of false accusations. But that didn't stop me from worrying about what my father might do when desperation overrode judgment entirely. The next blow to Moreno Enterprises came from an unexpected source. Carlos Mendoza, Victor's longtime CFO and trusted advisor, announced his resignation at a board meeting that Rosa attended as Victor's proxy. Carlos had been with the company for 15 years, Rosa reported. Victor promoted him personally, trusted him with the most sensitive financial decisions. But when Carlos suggested that maybe the company needed to consider a partnership with a more innovative firm to stay competitive, Victor accused him of disloyalty. What did Carlos say? I asked. He said he couldn't watch Victor destroy everything they'd built together out of stubbornness and pride. Then he stood up, handed over his resignation letter, and walked out. Rosa's voice cracked slightly. Bella, I've never seen your father look so shaken. Losing Carlos isn't just about losing an employee, it's about losing the last person who was willing to tell him hard truths. The industry took notice. Carlos Mendoza's departure sent ripples through the business community, signaling instability at a company that had once been considered unshakable. Within a week, 2 more longtime clients announced they were reviewing their service providers. Elena thinks we should make a formal bid for the Morrison account, Daniel told me over dinner. Morrison Industries was one of Moreno Enterprises' oldest and most prestigious clients, a relationship that predated my birth. They're quietly shopping for alternatives after Morrison's son joined the board and started questioning their logistics costs. That would destroy him, I said quietly. If father loses Morrison Industries, it's not just about money, it's about the symbolic end of an era. Daniel set down his fork, his expression serious. Bella, I need you to understand something. I'm not targeting your father's clients out of spite, But I also can't turn down legitimate business opportunities because they might hurt his feelings. Morrison Industries deserves the best service available, and if that's not what they're getting from Moreno Enterprises, they have every right to look elsewhere. I nodded, understanding the logic even as my heart ached for the man my father had once been. You're right, it's just hard to watch someone I once admired make choices that guarantee his own destruction. Your father made his choice 3 years ago when he decided that pride was more important than family, Daniel replied gently. He's making the same choice now with his business. I didn't force him into either situation. The Morrison bid was everything Daniel had promised. Innovative, cost-effective, and tailored specifically to their evolving needs. When they accepted his proposal, effectively ending a 30-year relationship with Moreno Enterprises, I felt the tremor that shook my father's world even from across the city. He's not taking it well, Rosa reported during our next meeting. Victor called Morrison personally, asking what he'd done wrong, what he could do to win them back. When Morrison explained that it was simply a business decision based on better service options, Victor, he broke down. What do you mean broke down? He started crying, Bella. Right there on the phone, asking Morrison to remember their friendship, their history, everything he'd done for the company over the years. Rose's voice was barely above a whisper. Morrison felt so uncomfortable that he ended the call. That's not the Victor Moreno anyone knows. He's always been so controlled, so professional. The image of my proud father reduced to tears, begging a client to reconsider, struck me like a physical blow. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined when I dreamed of proving him wrong. It was just sad. The board called an emergency meeting. They're talking about bringing in a consultant to evaluate the company's future viability. Some members are even suggesting that Victor should consider stepping down as CEO. Stepping down. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a funeral pyre. Victor Moreno without his company was like a king without his kingdom. I couldn't imagine what would be left of him. How much time does he have? I asked. Not much. Maybe 6 months before the board forces changes he won't like. Unless... Rosa hesitated, then pressed forward. Unless he can turn things around somehow, show them that Moreno Enterprises still has fight left in it. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to Daniel's steady breathing, I wondered if there was still time for my father to save himself. Not his pride, that was already lost, but his company, his legacy, perhaps even his relationship with his daughter. The question was whether he was capable of the humility required to ask for help, or if he would continue his stubborn march towards self-destruction. Outside our window, the city hummed with the energy of businesses rising and falling, of fortunes made and lost, of the eternal cycle of success and failure that defined the corporate world. Somewhere in that maze of lights, my father sat in his office, probably working late again, still believing he could solve his problems through force of will alone. But will, I'd learned, was only as powerful as the wisdom that guided it. And wisdom, true wisdom, required admitting when you were wrong, something Victor Moreno had never been able to do. The cracks in his empire were spreading. Soon, they would become chasms that no amount of pride could bridge. The call from Elena came on a Tuesday morning while Daniel was reviewing quarterly projections. Her voice carried an excitement I'd rarely heard from the typically composed businesswoman. "Daniel, I need you to clear your afternoon," she said without preamble. "We have an opportunity that could change everything." Within an hour, we were sitting in Elena's conference room as she spread documents across the table like a general planning a decisive battle. "Moreno Enterprises is hemorrhaging money," she announced. 3 more major clients terminated their contracts this week, and their cash flow is becoming critical. My sources say Victor is scrambling to secure emergency financing just to make payroll. I felt my stomach drop. Hearing about my father's struggles secondhand through Rosa was one thing. Seeing the actual financial documents that detailed his company's death spiral was another. "Why are you showing us this?" Daniel asked, though I could see him already understanding the implications. "Because Moreno Enterprises is about to go on the market, whether Victor wants it to or not. The board is moving toward forcing a sale to recover their investments." Elena smiles sharp as a blade. "And I think we should be the ones to buy it."
The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel studied the financial reports while I struggled to process what Elena was suggesting. My father's company, the empire he'd built from nothing, the legacy he'd valued more than his own daughter, purchased by the very man he dismissed as worthless. "The irony is almost poetic," Elena continued. "Victor spent so much energy trying to destroy Daniel's reputation that he ignored his own company's deteriorating fundamentals. Now Daniel's success puts him in position to acquire what Victor can no longer manage." "What would happen to the employees?" Daniel asked, his practical nature cutting through the emotional implications. "That would be your decision as the new owner, though I'd recommend keeping the talented ones and clearing out the deadweight, starting with management that's proven incapable of adaptation." I watched Daniel's face as he processed the opportunity. This wasn't just about business acquisition. It was the complete reversal of every assumption my father had made about worth, potential, and social hierarchy. The mechanic's son would own the businessman's empire. "When would this happen?" Daniel asked. "Soon. Victor has maybe 2 months before the board forces his hand. If we position ourselves correctly, we could be the obvious choice when they start taking offers." That evening, Daniel and I walked through our neighborhood, past the auto shop where he'd learned the value of honest work, past the community center where we'd first met. The contrast between these humble surroundings and the corporate takeover we'd just discussed felt surreal. "Are you sure about this? Buying my father's company feels like crossing a line we can't uncross." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face me with an expression of profound seriousness. "Bella, 3 years ago, your father told me I'd never be able to provide for you properly. He said I had nothing to offer someone of your caliber." His voice grew stronger. "If I have the opportunity to prove him wrong while also building something meaningful, shouldn't I take it?" "But what if this destroys any chance we might have of reconciling with him someday?" "Has he shown any interest in reconciliation?" Daniel asked gently. "He hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, Bella. He's tried to sabotage my business relationships and poison my reputation in the industry. At what point do we stop hoping for acceptance from someone who's made his position crystal clear?" I knew he was right, but the thought of my father's humiliation still twisted my heart. He's going to see this as the ultimate betrayal, his worst nightmare coming true. Maybe. Or maybe it'll finally force him to confront the reality that his judgments were wrong, that the man he dismissed as beneath his daughter was actually someone worthy of respect. 2 weeks later, Elena's prediction proved accurate. Moreno Enterprises' board of directors announced they were exploring strategic alternatives, corporate speak for putting the company up for sale. The business community buzzed with speculation about potential buyers, but Elena had already positioned us as the most logical choice. "We have the capital, the industry connections, and most importantly, the operational expertise to turn the company around. Daniel's track record of improving struggling logistics operations makes him the ideal candidate to revitalize Moreno Enterprises." The formal bidding process would begin in 30 days. Daniel threw himself into preparation with the same focused intensity he'd brought to every challenge since I'd known him. He analyzed every aspect of my father's operation, identifying inefficiencies and developing restructuring plans that could restore profitability. "The core business is still sound," he told me as he worked late into the night. Victor's problem wasn't the market or the competition. It was his refusal to evolve. With the right leadership and some strategic changes,
Moreno Enterprises could be competitive again. I found it fascinating to watch Daniel approach the acquisition of my father's company with such clinical objectivity. There was no gloating, no personal vindictiveness, just a businessman recognizing an opportunity to build something valuable from the ruins of someone else's pride. "What are you going to do if you actually get it?" I asked. "Rebuild it," he said simply. "Honor what was good about what my father created while fixing what was broken. Turn it into the kind of company that succeeds because it deserves to, not because it refuses to change." As the bidding deadline approached, I realized that Daniel's potential acquisition of Moreno Enterprises represented more than just poetic justice. It was the completion of a transformation that had begun 3 years ago when he'd chosen love over acceptance, ambition over comfort, growth over stagnation. The mechanic's son would become the owner of an empire, and the man who'd once called him worthless would have no choice but to watch it happen. The phone call that shattered my peaceful Sunday morning came from Rosa, her voice tight with panic.
"Bella, your father knows," she said without preamble, "about Daniel's bid for the company. He's not handling it well." I glanced at Daniel, who was reading the newspaper at our kitchen table, completely unaware that our carefully maintained distance from my father was about to collapse. "What do you mean, not handling it well?" "He's on his way to your apartment. He left here 20 minutes ago, and Bella, I've never seen him like this. He's beyond angry. He's desperate." My blood turned to ice. In all the scenarios I'd imagined for how this confrontation would unfold, my father showing up at our door in a rage hadn't been one of them. "Daniel," I said, ending the call, "we have a problem." Before I could explain, the doorbell rang. Not the polite chime of a visitor, but the aggressive buzz of someone leaning on the button. Daniel and I looked at each other, both understanding immediately who was outside. "Let me handle this," Daniel said quietly, rising from his chair with the calm confidence that had become his trademark. "We handle it together," I replied, taking his hand. "He's going to have to face both of us." When we opened the door, the man standing in our hallway barely resembled the composed businessman I'd grown up fearing and respecting. Victor Moreno's usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and fury. "You," he said, pointing a shaking finger at Daniel, "how dare you? How dare you try to steal everything I've worked for?" "Mr. Moreno," Daniel replied evenly, "if you'd like to have a conversation, please come inside, but I won't be yelled at in my own hallway." "Conversation?" Victor's laugh was bitter, broken. "What conversation? You've been planning this from the beginning, haven't you? Marrying my daughter was just the first step in some elaborate scheme to destroy me." "Papa, stop," I said, stepping forward. "Daniel didn't plan anything. You destroyed your own company through arrogance and stubbornness." "My own daughter," Victor whispered, his voice cracking, "helping them plot against me. Your mother would be ashamed." The words hit like a physical blow. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare invoke her memory to justify your failures. Mama loved me unconditionally. She would never have disowned me for choosing love." "Love?" Victor's composure cracked entirely. "You call this love? You've been feeding him information about my business, haven't you? Telling him which clients to target, which weaknesses to exploit?" "I've had no contact with your business for 3 years," I shot back. "Daniel won those clients through his own merit, something you never bothered to recognize." Daniel, who had been listening to this exchange with careful silence, finally spoke. "Mr. Moreno, I've never used inside information or underhanded tactics. Every client I won chose my services because I offered them something better than what they were getting. If that threatens your business, perhaps you should examine why you're not providing the same level of service." "Service? You want to talk about service? I built Moreno Enterprises when you were still in diapers. I created jobs, supported families, contributed to this community for 30 years, and now some upstart mechanic thinks he can waltz in and take over?" "Some upstart mechanic who you never gave a chance to prove himself," Daniel replied, his voice growing harder. "Some upstart mechanic who you judged based on his bank account instead of his character.
Some upstart mechanic who's now in a position to buy your failing company because he understood something you never did, that success comes from serving clients better, not from demanding their loyalty out of entitlement. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Victor's face went through a spectrum of emotions: rage, disbelief, and finally something that looked like recognition. "You planned this," he whispered, "from that first dinner. You planned to humiliate me." "No," Daniel said with quiet finality. "You planned your own humiliation the moment you decided a man's worth was determined by his social status rather than his actions. I just refused to accept your judgment." 3 years, Victor continued, as if Daniel hadn't spoken. 3 years, you've been systematically destroying everything I built, taking my clients, stealing my employees, poisoning the industry against me. "I've been building my own success," Daniel corrected. "The fact that your failure coincided with my growth doesn't make me responsible for your choices." Victor's eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the father I'd once known, confused, hurt, lost. "Bella, please, you're my daughter. You can't let him do this to me." The plea in his voice nearly broke my heart, but the years of rejection had built walls that couldn't be torn down with a few desperate words.
"You're not my father anymore," I said quietly. "You made that choice 3 years ago when you decided that your pride was more important than your daughter. Daniel isn't doing anything to you. You did it to yourself." Victor stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the last of his composure crumble. "Then I have nothing left to lose," he said, his voice turning cold. "If you want to destroy me, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people you really are." "We're the kind of people who build rather than tear down," Daniel replied. "The kind who earn respect rather than demand it. The kind who choose love over pride." With that, Victor turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I realized I was crying, not for the man who'd just left, but for the father I'd lost long before today. Daniel pulled me close, and I buried my face in his shoulder. "It's over," I whispered. "No," he said gently. "It's just beginning. We're going to build something beautiful from the ashes of his pride, something your mother would be proud of." As we stood there in our doorway, holding each other in the aftermath of the confrontation I dreaded for 3 years, I finally understood what my mother had meant about love being stronger than any obstacle. We'd weathered my father's rejection, his attempts at sabotage, and now his final desperate attack. And we were still standing, still together, still building our future one choice at a time. The acquisition of Moreno Enterprises moved forward with the ruthless efficiency of a well-orchestrated business transaction. But for me, every document signed felt like watching a funeral in slow motion. Elena had assembled a team of lawyers and accountants who dissected my father's empire with clinical precision. Asset valuations, employee assessments, client contract reviews. The company that had once seemed as permanent as a mountain was reduced to spreadsheets and legal briefs. "The due diligence is complete," Elena announced during our final strategy meeting. "Moreno Enterprises is more vulnerable than we initially thought. Their debt-to-asset ratio is critical, and they have significant outstanding obligations that Victor has been juggling for months." Daniel studied the financial reports with the focused attention he brought to every business challenge. "What's the timeline for closure?" 2 weeks. The board has accepted our offer, and Victor has been notified that he has 14 days to vacate his office and transfer all administrative responsibilities. I tried to imagine my father, the man who had commanded that office for 3 decades, packing his personal belongings into cardboard boxes. The thought made my stomach twist with conflicting emotions: satisfaction, grief, and an unexpected flicker of pity. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do about Victor himself?" Elena asked Daniel. "Technically, you could retain him in a consulting capacity, though I wouldn't recommend it." "No," Daniel said firmly. "A clean break is better for everyone. Victor needs to understand that his era is over."
Rosa called me that evening with an update that confirmed my worst fears about my father's state of mind. "He's not leaving his office," she reported, her voice tight with worry. "The security guards say he's been there for 3 days straight, refusing to pack anything or acknowledge the transition. He's just sitting at his desk staring at the wall." "Has he been eating? Sleeping?" "I don't think so. When I tried to bring him dinner last night, he wouldn't even look at me. Bella, I'm scared. I've never seen him like this." The image of my proud father, reduced to a broken man haunting his former kingdom, struck me like a physical blow. Whatever anger I'd carried toward him, I'd never wanted this complete destruction of his spirit. "Maybe I should go see him," I said hesitantly. "I don't think that's a good idea. He's been muttering about betrayal, about how his own daughter orchestrated his downfall. I'm afraid seeing you might push him over the edge entirely." The final confrontation came not in my father's office, but at the building's main entrance, witnessed by a dozen employees who would soon be working for Daniel. Victor had apparently decided to make one last stand, positioning himself in the lobby like a general defending his castle. "You want my company?" he shouted as Daniel approached with the final transfer documents. "You want to steal everything I built? Then look me in the eye while you do it." Daniel paused, studying my father with an expression that held no triumph, but only tired sadness. "This isn't theft, Mr. Moreno. This is the natural consequence of your choices." "My choices?" Victor's laugh was bitter, broken. "I chose to build something meaningful. I chose to create jobs and serve clients and contribute to this community. What did you choose? To seduce my daughter and destroy my life?"
"I chose to love your daughter when you rejected her," Daniel replied quietly. "I chose to build my own success when you said I was worthless. I chose to compete fairly when you tried to sabotage my reputation. Every choice you mentioned was a reaction to your judgment, not a plan to hurt you." The employees watching this confrontation shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that they were witnessing the complete collapse of a man who had once commanded their respect. 30 years, whispered Victor, his voice cracking. 30 years I poured my life into this company, and now it belongs to a mechanic's son who thinks he's better than me? "I don't think I'm better than you," said Daniel with genuine conviction. "I think I made different choices. Better choices, maybe, but that doesn't make me superior to you as a person." "Then why?" Victor's composure finally shattered completely. "Why did you have to take everything? Why couldn't you have been satisfied with stealing my daughter?" The words hung in the air like acid smoke. Daniel was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Because you taught me that in your world, worth is measured by success. You told me I wasn't good enough for Bella because I didn't have money or status. So I went out and earned both. Now I have more of each than you do, and you still can't admit that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong about me." Victor stared at Daniel as if seeing him clearly for the first time. The recognition that dawned in his eyes was painful to witness. The understanding that his own rigid worldview had created the very situation he now found himself trapped in. "You win," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've taken my daughter, my business, my reputation. You win." "This was never about winning," Daniel replied. "This was about building a life with the woman I love and proving that success comes from character, not birthright. If you had seen that 3 years ago, we might all be in a very different place." With that, Victor Moreno walked out of the building that had housed his empire, his shoulders slumped in complete defeat. The employees who remained watched their former boss disappear into the afternoon sunlight, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps and the weight of a legacy undone by pride. Daniel turned to address the staff, his voice carrying the authority of ownership, but tempered with compassion. "I know this transition is difficult. Change always is. But I want you to know that this company has a future. We're going to rebuild what was damaged, modernize what was outdated, and create something that serves our clients better than ever before." As I watched my husband address the employees of my father's former empire, I felt the strange completion of a circle that had begun 3 years ago, with a dinner invitation and a father's cruel judgment. The mechanic's son now owned the businessman's legacy,
And somehow, despite all the pain and conflict, it felt like justice. Not the bitter justice of revenge, but the deeper justice of merit rewarded and character revealed. My father had built an empire through determination and hard work, but he had lost it through pride and inflexibility. Daniel would rebuild it through the same determination, but with the humility my father had never possessed. The fall of the patriarch was complete. The rise of a new king had begun. 6 months later, I stood in the office that had once been my father's, watching Daniel address a room full of employees, whose paychecks now bore his signature. The quarterly report showed what everyone had hoped for but few had believed possible. Moreno Enterprises was profitable again. Innovation doesn't mean abandoning everything that came before. It means building on the foundation while adapting to new realities. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city sprawling below us, full of dreamers and builders, strivers and survivors. Somewhere out there, my father was learning to live without the empire that had defined him for 30 years. Rosa reported that he'd taken a small consulting job, a humbling step down from his former position, but perhaps the beginning of wisdom. Daniel had kept his promise to rebuild rather than destroy. Under his leadership, the company had modernized its systems, expanded its services, and won back several former clients who'd been impressed by the dramatic turnaround. The Moreno name remained on the building, but the values inside had shifted from pride to performance, from tradition to innovation. "You know what I love most about this?" I said to Daniel as the meeting concluded and employees filtered back to their desks with renewed energy. "What's that?" "My mother would have been proud of us, not for beating my father, but for choosing to build something good from something broken." Daniel pulled me close, and I marveled at how far we'd traveled from that disastrous dinner 3 years ago. We'd lost a family, but found each other. We'd endured rejection, but
Acceptance. We'd chosen love over status and discovered that sometimes, if you're patient enough, the world rearranges itself to prove your choices right. As we walked through the halls of what had once been my father's kingdom, I thought about legacy, not the kind measured in stock prices or corporate holdings, but the kind written in the choices we make when no one is watching. My father had built an empire through determination and lost it through pride. Daniel was rebuilding it through the same determination, tempered with the humility that comes from knowing what it means to be underestimated. The mechanic's son had become a business leader. The disowned daughter had become a partner in her own right, running the community outreach programs that connected the company to the neighborhood where we'd learned to love without conditions. In the end, my father had been right about one thing. Daniel and I were building a legacy. It just wasn't the one he'd expected, and it was more beautiful than he'd ever imagined possible. True worth, as my mother had always known, couldn't be measured by bank accounts or bloodlines. It lived in the quiet moments between two people who'd chosen each other despite the world's objections, in the daily decision to build rather than tear down, in the revolutionary act of loving someone exactly as they are while believing in who they could become. My name is Isabella Reyes now, and this is the story of how love conquered pride, how persistence defeated prejudice, and how two people who were told they weren't good enough proved that worth isn't inherited, it's earned, one choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.